Yeah, all right, everyone. We are doing a video tonight. I guess it's a kind of reaction video, looking at the last housing committee in Bedford back in February 2024. There was a little bit of drama, as we'll see in a little bit, and lots of interesting things happened, both from the point of view of politics and also the legal kind of point of view. So actually, I would imagine that if we do a good job with this, we're going to come out with a fairly informative video, and it just kind of it gives you an impression of where we're at with Bedford Borough Council, how long it's taken us to get here. So we're going to give a bit of commentary on the history of us in Bedford over the years. Just to point out as well, so me and Shannon live in Bedford and work in Bedford. Will is in the M25 somewhere, so he is completely new to this. So we're going to treat Will as being completely naive and doesn't know who anyone is, and then that will hopefully just kind of help other people just kind of follow what's going on. We will give a bit of a kind of backstory on the different political makeup because it's really important. If you're going to try and do something around homelessness services, you need to understand the politics of it. And I'll kind of when we get that far in the video, I'll kind of maybe break that down a bit as well. So this is the housing committee. There's a committee panel of about, I think, about 8 different councillors, something like that. Not all of them talk, so only a few of them are actually useful. But you've got Conservatives, Labour, Liberal Dems, and a Green councillor as well. So, and there's basically, it's probably worth saying, there's a useful councillor. There's at least one useful councillor in every party, which is quite nice for us. So it's not that one party's rubbish, although there do appear to be a few rubbish councillors in some of the parties who are just useless. But anyway, um, yeah, so let me give you a backstory of what happened here. So we've been going to the housing committee. I think I asked my first question in 2015 or something, 2014, I can't remember when now. And we've been pretty regular ever since. Certainly in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I think we've been at pretty much every housing committee asking questions. And I've mentioned this sort of stuff before. It's led to a lot of positive changes. So it's a really effective way of doing things. And we were sort of plodding along, just asking questions, kind of pretty big picture questions. And me and Shannon were meeting up for a drink at Brew Point, and just to kind of discuss some work stuff that's going on. And Shannon casually mentioned that the housing committee was that night, and we were like, "What the hell? We haven't prepared for this because normally it would be the next month." And it turned out they'd called an extraordinary meeting and not told us anyway, which I appreciate. They don't have to tell us, but it would have been nice because we do have frequent contact with them. So we're rushing around looking at the agenda, which is all on the council's website. And I come across a document by a guy called Andy Gale. Now, Andy Gale immediately kind of caught my attention because I remember a news story about Andy Gale, or a couple of news stories about Andy Gale back in 2013. Interesting, when I worked at Bedford Borough Council. I'll let you make your own minds up about what that's all about. But if you Google the strange case of Andy Gale, or even who does Andy Gale work for, you'll come up with a number of kind of news stories and blogs and stuff. Essentially, there was a bit of hoo-ha with him something like 10 years ago. I can't remember the exact detail of the report, so I'm not going to try and libel him and mess something up. Read them for yourself. But certainly in my mind, I remember there being some issues about him. So I was like, shit, man, what's this? We need to read this up. We opened the document, and there's about a 90-page document which the council had commissioned, which was all about reducing the number of people in temporary accommodation. And we were like, do you know what? The numbers are really good. Bedford's made some massive improvements in the last few years. And it seemed to us at first reading, bearing in mind we tried to get through a whole document in about 90 minutes. We tried to, we're kind of looking at it and just thinking there was a number of things that were just jumping out at us from the document. So a lot of it was kind of, in my opinion, coded. And just to say, everything we're about to say is our honestly held beliefs. Our honestly expressed opinions, just for libel law purposes. But certainly some of the things that I was reading were kind of coded things around what I would say are unlawful kind of practices. So things like same-day non-priority decisions. So there are times when you can make a same-day non-priority decision legitimately, but the case law, if you look at IAV Westminster or something like that, and you look at the commentary on that, it's very clear that when you're working with someone who has got complicated mental health issues or something like that, it's simply impossible to make a same-day non-priority decision about them. So so that was kind of that kind of immediately brought my attention. There were a lot of talk about targets. The council should have targets about how many people to put in temporary accommodation. And again, how can you do that? If you're a housing officer and you've already got the target of the number of people in TA, and someone comes up to you and there's a duty to house them, what do you do? Well, that target kind of has to go out the window. And so I've got a couple of extracts here which I'll flash up on the screen. So, for example, no applicant should be booked into temporary accommodation as a result of a telephone interview unless there is a disability that prevents them from attending the office, or is it an out of hours placement. So it might seem like a minor thing, but as I say, it's the law, so it's all a bit pernickety and pedantic. There is nothing in the law that says you have to attend in person to get temporary accommodation. Now, obviously, usually that would be good if you can be there for sure. That's helpful, but to have a requirement or have like an instruction that no one should be placed unless they attend in person, unless there's a disability, would be would be an additional barrier between a person and the assistance owed. I mean, the case law, I've forgotten the name of it now. Roberts XP Chilton or something like that, DC. A case from the 80s showed that you can trigger a homeless application via email, like a solicitor can on someone else's behalf, assuming you got consent, and the duty to provide temporary accommodation kicks in immediately as soon as there is reason to believe that you might be homeless, might be eligible, might be in priority need. So the second bit I've just flashed up on the screen as well. However, a decision as to whether a TA duty is owed should only be made after a thorough assessment has been completed. Now, again, that's not the way the threshold works. Yes, the council's absolutely right to make a thorough assessment, but you don't work out if there's a TA duty after that assessment. If someone says they're pregnant and they're homeless and they're British citizen, for sake of argument, the duty to provide TA would be immediate, and then you make the inquiries. LGO reports, numerous LGO reports have made that point. So again, it might seem like a pretty minor thing, but it's all about, it's what's happening between the lines here. And again, I'll just read a couple more. I'm not going to go into too much actually, because just because I don't want to repeat myself. But there's one bit around basically the authors. It's Andy Gale. I can't remember the name of the other author actually right now, but we'll put it up on the screen. It's available on the council's documents. So although it says it's confidential, the council's published it, so it's not confidential anymore. And so at one point it says there is some evidence to suggest that Bedford is to place that suggests the practice in Bedford is to place into TA at the point of a valid 56-day Section 21 notice expiring, unless the tenant expresses a preference to exercise their legal right to stay until a possession order is granted or when it is reaching the point of expiry and a bailiff eviction date is obtained. A 3-month snapshot exercise looking at the causes of TA placement in Bedford, detailed earlier in this report, record that approximately half of the Section 21 cases are provided with TA at the point the notice expires. Now, if you compare that with what the Code of Guidance says, where it says it's unlikely to be reasonable to continue to occupy accommodation past the expiry of a Section 21 notice, then what's happening in Bedford is pretty much exactly what you should have if you're following the law. So, a minority of people should go on to remain in occupation after that date. So there's some issues around that as well. As I say, there's probably more to say, but that's what me and Shannon were like panicking about. We're like drinking our coffees and thinking, Struth, what the hell's going on here? So, Shannon, I don't know if you remember much about that conversations that we were having at the time.
I really do, because it didn't feel casual the way I announced it, and I don't want to be dramatic, but I got really emotional. Like, I was reading through it opposite you, and I just felt like this rage and like pure disappointment, because I was like, hold up, like Bedford Borough Council has made such like impressive improvements. They are, like working with like us, they're saying all the right things, and this report, and it wasn't personal to me, but it felt like a big sort of like F you, F all the work you've done, F your own experiences of how tough the system is. Like, we don't care. We're doing this behind closed doors. Like, it felt like a secret. There wasn't sort of anything on social media saying, well, tonight we're having an extraordinary meeting, everyone. So if you want to come along. Yeah, it felt really personal and emotional. And obviously I've got my own lived experience of going through it and stuff. And think I remember being quite worried as well about coded stuff in there, because I was like, to anyone who doesn't understand anything about housing law, this is going to read like a dream. Like, people aren't going to know why this is such a dangerous document. And I am going to use the word dangerous, and we'll probably come to that sort of later and stuff, but it literally is affecting lives and the safety of people's lives. And the way that it's coded, yeah, it was pure rage. And I was really grateful to have you there, because you're like, just make notes, start annotating the document, and like we've got a little bit of a plan together. And so yeah, I do remember it, because I still feel, yeah.
I mean, I thought, as we'll see later on, I thought the assessment of one of the councillors that it was essentially an instruction manual to councils of how to gatekeep was a very helpful one, and we'll leave him to say that, not us. Just, I guess, a couple of notes on the technology here as well, because I haven't actually mentioned it yet. So the full committee meeting was about an hour and a half, but I've just cut down the bits which are talking about this particular issue. There's some other interesting stuff that happened in the meeting that there isn't time to talk about here. And I've also changed the white balance, because the original video looks like it was filmed in the 70s, and I've tried to make it look slightly prettier and also improve the audio, because at the points the audio was almost inaudible. So yeah, that's what. And reading through it, we sat in Brew Point, and we're like, and I knew, I was like, shit, man, I'm gonna have to say something, and it's gonna be rushed. You know, I usually like to have ages to think it through and make sure I'm not going to say something I regret. But I put a question together, which essentially was, I'm a former whistleblower. This report is basically advising the council to break the law. You know, what of it? I mean, I'm going to play the video in a minute. So, and I'd gone in. So the person I'm sitting next to, there's John Allen, who I set Just Us up with in Bedford. He still works with Just Us. I just needed someone with me, because I was like, you know, I do not enjoy these types of meetings. I get really nervous, and yeah, just kind of wish I wasn't there, basically. So I was, you know, kind of worried the whole afternoon. Driving to there, so this started at 6:30. I got a call from Lee Fanco, who is, you know, the kind of the one of the most senior officers in the council, and he can't remember the exact nature of what he said, so I don't want to misquote him, but he wasn't happy about the question, and he was trying to get me to water it down and stuff. And as I say, I was in a rush, so I was like, I ended up dropping a section of it, which I'll explain later. But for me, kind of, you know, it wasn't the most important bit of the question, and I didn't want to have a libel suit with Andy Gale. So yeah, and a few other bits of details about the guy behind us there. So that's John Gwynn. He is the local democracy reporter for the BBC. I think he sits in every single council meeting. He knows those. He was on the event we did back in February on looking at local democracy. So essentially, his job is to sit there in all meetings and report stuff that's interesting. And what that means is, if you ask a question, you'll often end up being in the local press, because your question will get quoted. So that's that. I don't think there's anything else I need to say before I play the beginning of the video. As I say, at the beginning of a housing committee meeting, or the beginning of any meeting, members of the public can ask questions. I think in Bedford they do require that you email the question first, which is fine for us. And just before, in fact, just before the meeting started, once I actually got there with John, Lee Fanco again just took me aside and said, you know, it would be helpful if you didn't say some of this stuff. So I took a bit out, which I guess was a bit of a compromise there. And yeah, I'll explain what I cut out in a minute, actually. So here it goes. So this is, as I say, me asking a question, and then between me, Will and Shannon, we'll just kind of interrupt ourselves here and just kind of give a comment or give a bit of background as we go. So here goes.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Hayden. I'm a Bedford resident, lived here all my life, and I am a former employee at Bedford Borough Council. I worked here in 2011 to 2013. And whilst I was there, I submitted a report to the Council's confidential reporting policy, which is also known as the whistleblowing policy, following a number of serious issues I witnessed, ranging from senior officers forging client signature, through to direct discrimination against people with various protected characteristics, through to explicit gatekeeping of assistance owed to people under the Housing Act 1996. I'm aware today that you are going to be discussing a document called the Homeless Service Diagnostic Document as agenda item 6, and I just wanted to raise some concerns about it. After leaving the council, I was formally thanked by the Assistant Chief Executive for submitting the whistleblowing report. I then co-founded Just Us with John Allen in 2014 and subsequently supported hundreds of people to access assistance they were owed under the Housing Act 1996. In the course of this work, we secured many scores of upheld complaints and compensation payouts for vulnerable individuals unlawfully denied housing, as well as other maladministration by Bedford Borough Council. I have raised some of these complaints with the Housing Committee before, but there are many more that may not be known to the committee. I believe the reason that temporary accommodation, numbers in temporary accommodation has increased in Bedford so markedly in recent years when compared to the national average is due to the council genuinely trying to fulfil their statutory duties, and there have been a great deal of deep-rooted improvements in the service. I was very concerned to read some of the suggestions made by the Homeless Service Diagnostic Document and believe some of them are unambiguously unlawful. Would anyone on the committee be happy to meet with me to discuss these issues to ensure the council does not proceed with unlawful practices? I'm very concerned that Bedford Borough Council will unlawfully deny safe housing to vulnerable local residents should all these recommendations be endorsed.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of meeting?
So just pause here and I'll give you a bit of a who's who of who's speaking. So this is Councillor Philippa Martin Moran Bryant, who is the chair of the Housing Committee. So she, as far as I know, she's a barrister in her day job. So I think within the area of planning law. So I'm not quite sure how kind of broad that goes, but I imagine it's quite a useful skill set to have in the Housing Committee. She's Conservative. So and I guess a little bit of background as well, just the party politics of all this. About a year ago, the Liberal Democrat Mayor Dave Hodgson, who was jokingly called the most powerful Liberal Democrat in the country because he kind of was, because Bedford effectively had a majority of there's like a Liberal Democrat Labour coalition, which meant they had a majority of councillors, and he had the deciding vote. So he had a lot of power. Now, personally, I disliked the previous mayor intensely for a few reasons, but he was very, very intelligent, very thoughtful, very conscientious, and I think he cared a lot about. Kelly he definitely did care a lot about Bedford Borough in general, and he cared a lot about people who are vulnerable. So I would say that in one sense it was him. I think it was him that drove the increase in numbers in temporary accommodation. Now, a year ago, he lost the election to the new Tory mayor called Tom Wootton, who is certainly not a details man. Let's put it that way. That's my impression of him, having met him a couple of times. Doesn't appear to be too interested in the detail. I'm not entirely convinced, in my own opinion, that he expected to win the election. It bucked the national trend. Obviously, Tories were tanking in the polls. I think the reason Dave Hodgson lost the previous election was because there's this East-West rail service kind of coming through, and how that was handled caused some issues. So there'd been this 13-year period before the current mayor where the Lib Dems had control, and they kind of seen Bedford Borough Council through these savage cuts coming from austerity Britain and so on. So they put their heart and souls into it, it seems to me. And they've been shat on a little bit, to be honest, by the new administration in terms of publicly getting berated for stuff, which actually I think we're trying their best with. But yeah, so that's yeah, that kind of gives us a bit of a picture. So there's a new committee. So up until last year, the chair was a Labour councillor who I found to be utterly useless, in my opinion. So the new chair is certainly an improvement, I think, over the previous chair. Philippa is sitting next to Laura Church. This is the Chief Exec of Bedford Borough Council. I don't know her at all, never met her. She was previously Deputy Chief Exec of Luton Borough Council, which, if you've ever done my training, you'll know that I had the worst ever experience of a homelessness service in Luton Borough Council. So, I'm sure that might have been a one-off or whatever, but it didn't bode well. And yeah, so this is, yeah, so the questions you ask will be directed at the chair, but there will sometimes be other people who answer questions. So I'll let her response play. I've just interrupted her. She basically, I think, just said that she was happy to meet with us, and then we'll see what else she says, and then we'll kind of take it forward from there.
Yes, as chair of this committee and portfolio holder, I would absolutely be very happy to meet with you. I've actually emailed you over a couple of dates if they are suitable for you. Obviously, any suggestions that you have made obviously will be taken very seriously, and I am very open to discussing all matters. I think in terms of a substantive response, it would be wise for us to give you a written response about that, and I think we would also need some substantiation and clarification on some of those points as well. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. So as of this date, as far as I'm aware, I've not been given a written response to this. This was February 14th. It's now 5th of June. So not had the written response yet. I will definitely be mentioning that in the committee next week, which is the next one that we've had. Yeah, what else? So trying to think what else, so just to say, we did meet with her. So Shannon, myself, John and Katie from Just Us met with her, and she was all right. I think we basically submitted an annotated version of the report with kind of our comments on it, sort of highlighting the bits which we thought were definitely unlawful and the bits we thought were, not good. In one sense, so in one sense, having targets on the number of people in TA is not in itself unlawful, but it seems to be a good recipe to have some unlawful stuff happening. So yeah, Shannon.
So yeah, just to point out as well, I guess a bit of context around meeting Councillor Philippa Martin Moran Bryant is we had been emailing her since November, was it? I guess I had asked a question in a housing committee and she said she was happy to meet with me. And then we sort of just didn't hear from her. about that meeting. And I get, you know, people are busy and stuff, but then, yeah, so there was a bit of like, we had tried meeting with her previous to this meeting, and this meeting was the catalyst, I guess, to get that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, yes, as she says that, I think she'd emailed me, must have been within like half an hour of me sending the question to the council. So clearly
Yeah.
it kind of focused some minds. And also I'd say, like, you know, we never know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but everyone was expecting. So when me and John turned up, everyone was like, oh, you know, hi guys, you know, and I think so. I think there'd been some, I think even John Gwynn knew that I was coming and I'd asked a question or something. So there'd been a bit of gossiping going on, I think, in terms of, you know, the fact we'd asked a question.
Does highlight the power of asking these housing committee questions, like a meeting or, you know, an email to arrange a meeting within half an hour. Everyone knows you're going to be there. They know the question. So like, for anyone watching this who's like, oh, nothing really happens because you don't get a response straight away. Like, things do happen behind those scenes. Like, it is a powerful way to sort of be listened to.
So I can't remember which bits I've cut out. So as I say, I'm just sticking on the bits which are about this report. So we might have a bit of a jump now or some point soon before we go on. Now, I'll introduce the other councillors as they come in. There's some significant ones. So
Thanks very much. Am I able to make a comment on that as well? Just in regard to that, I would say I've got a pretty good record with being right when it comes to these legal matters. When the council, I've been told many times by various officers that I'm wrong when it turns out the actual issue becomes resolved. So I hope that you take that as some kind of, I'm not just some random guy talking about this stuff. I do have some idea of it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I regretted saying that bit at the end there, but you know, you kind of, you're under pressure at the time and you're nervous. So, and that's exactly what's happened. So the number of times senior officers at the council have said, you know, what are you talking about, Mike? You don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And then you get the complaint upheld and all magically compensation comes. That's kind of been the pattern of behaviour. And you know, me and Will have been joking about the post office inquiry and just watching that and how you've got this belligerent defensiveness and kind of, you know, irrationality. Certainly seen a lot of that over the years with Bedford.
But again, the subtext to this is that something similar to the post office is happening, because it was not as bad as that, but you've got something really unpleasant being sneaked in under the radar. The thing I noticed, that it comes up in a bit, and I'll make my point later afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm not going to say anything that I don't mean in this video. Like, there are a number of people in this kind of conversation that we're about to see, who I regard as sincere. You know, they care. That people care. There's that the individual, the senior manager who I saw forging signatures is also in the room here, which is quite interesting. So there's a real mix of people. But yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting dynamic going on here. But as I say, most of the people I'd say who make the good points, they're sincere people, including the council officers. So I don't mind giving my opinion about that as we go. And if I don't trust someone, I would happy saying. As I say, Philip has come into this, you know, and effectively a lot of the stuff I'm talking about predates her, which in one sense gives her an easy out. Oh, you know, that's not on my watch, which is true. But I think there was an honesty when we met with her. She didn't obviously kind of roll over and say, you know, hands up, you've got us. But she was real about a lot of stuff, which was probably, you know, as constructive. I think we kind of left the meeting not annoyed, which is a good sign. So yeah.
100%. But what's happened since then?
Thank you.
We don't know yet. So yeah, great question, Jana. So I think we don't yet know what's really happening behind the scenes. So in one sense, there's some stuff which Councillor Dean Crofts comes up. So I mentioned his name. You'll see him in a little bit. He's a Lib Dem. He manages a service, a CAB service in a neighbouring borough, and I would say he was kind of a pivotal person in the previous Lib Dem administration. Very, very intelligent. I've got huge respect for him. I don't, you know, personally I don't know him, but you know, I know what he stands for. And so he, you know, yeah, I think he had concerns about the process here in terms of it being sort of snuck in, and he was asking, well, you know, why are you bringing it to us? You know, are you already doing this? And they said that they weren't, and I'm pretty sure they were certainly doing some of the things that are recommended here. So it seemed to be a little bit, there seemed to be some stuff going on there. And I guess also just to mention, the relationship between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems in Bedford is terrible. They just snipe each other in the press because, you know, I think the Lib Dems tried their best to do something, and then the Conservatives are just kind of cutting them down about stuff. And you know, they're very competent. The Lib Dems, you know, they were in office for 13 years. They're experienced politicians. Some of the Conservatives are quite new and haven't done this before. So they're kind of looking a bit silly a lot of the time, the Conservatives are, I'd say. So let's see what happens next.
Any other members of the public or members of the council who have a question? Yes, Councillor Crofts.
I do have.
So that's not Councillor Crofts, that's cut out. So basically, Councillor Crofts asked a question about damp and mould, which again is interesting, but it's not what we're talking about. This is Councillor James Weir, who I think is Conservative. Let's see what he's got to say.
A number of questions, and I kind of think I've got half answers from Laura's presentation.
And just to make the point, there's been a chunk when they kind of did the other agenda item. So we're now on agenda item 6, which is where this report has been discussed.
What you said, but I'll ask them anyway. Andy Gale and Anna Whalen from the Housing Consultancy. What is their experience and background, and why did we choose them? Was there a recommendation? And I know we've had a member of public has made a comment.
So the bit I took out of the question, by the way, was the fact that I basically quoted the newspaper articles to them and said, you know, these are people who've hit the national press before because of some slightly grubby things happening is how I'd word it. So that, although I took it out, they'd obviously seen the question, which is why I think that kind of this guy's asking the question about, you know, why were these two people brought in to do the report.
Also, just to sort of say, Councillor James Weir here has sort of alluded to like Laura's presentation on this report, and I personally felt that presentation did not accurately reflect what was in the report. So it's just worth bearing in mind as well when you've got these sort of things happening to read the reports, because I felt the way that it was presented was not at all linked to like the document.
Yeah, I would certainly feel that the councillors will be doing very, very well to really understand what's going on with all this if they just listen to what they're being told. And that over the years, that's been a big problem. So, you know, there's been very serious failures within the council, and I don't think councillors are necessarily told what's going on. So they're a bit like, you know, what are you talking about criticising us? And actually, it's like, you know, there's been some really serious failures that have kind of been upheld or whatever. So, yeah, let's. I can't remember what his question's about. He kept talking about computer system, which isn't terribly relevant, but let's see what else he's saying.
That's okay. Andy Gale and Anna Whalen, I had come across.
Right, so this is Anna Rabbani. Anna Rabbani is I think her technical title is interim head. She's interim head of service, basically. She's worked within the housing team for quite some time. And I consider her to be very decent. I don't know her personally, but sincere. She cares what she's talking about. So she'll kind of be the go-to person when the council itself is being asked for stuff. Yeah, and again, she's in a tough position. It's a bit of a poison chalice, this job. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how anyone can actually do it.
Based on some of their reports and writing previously for other councils, they're quite well respected and well known in the sector. They also provided some support around the allocations policy review a couple of years ago, so I'd come across them at that point as well.
We actually did a mini competitive process and invited bids to do this work with us, so they were the successful consultant.
Yeah, we'll share out the love. In that case, Councillor Crofts.
Yeah, just a question on the report, Chair.
So this is Councillor Crofts, Dean Crofts. This is his first. So I think initially the Conservatives excluded Lib Dems from the Housing Committee altogether. Might be wrong about that, but this is, as far as I know, this is Councillor Crofts' first time in the committee in its new form. And he seemed to have quite a lot of stuff to say even before we got this far. So yeah, this is the CAB manager who understands the law, I'd say, pretty well.
The report says it's been to executive in January, but I couldn't see it on the agenda of the executive in January. So I'm just wondering, in relation to the recommendations from the consultancy, what has the executive of the council decided about which recommendations to take forward and which not to take forward?
Apologies, no, it hasn't been to executive. That's a mistake on the papers. So,
oh, I don't know what's going. Is that a mistake, or is that someone's messed up there, or who knows what? I mean, I think so. Councillor Crofts has gone straight in there to say, you know, has this been signed off already? What's going on? And you know, maybe it was just a mistake. Who knows?
My apologies for that.
Will it be going to executive?
Yes, it's scheduled to go to the next executive.
Yeah, so just for clarity, I wanted it to come here first because this is the Housing Committee and then go to the executive, which I guess is why you're asking, isn't it?
So following on from that, is the housing options team implementing all of the recommendations before it goes to executive, or will the recommendations be looked at and changed if there are concerns, so the housing options team can adapt to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the point of having this evening, is to hear, you know, it's not to say that we're just going to have this. I'm not going to take on any concerns. This is supposed to be a genuine opportunity for us to discuss the report and ask questions, yeah.
Thank you. Further down,
if I can just come in before Ben Foley asks his question. One of the things I didn't understand was why wasn't the prospect of having a diagnostic report on the service brought to a housing committee before they, you know, if you're putting out a bid, essentially, and you're getting consultants to compete for this bid, would you not take it, if you're being transparent and, like she says, she wants the committee to discuss it, to debate it, why wouldn't you take that to the committee first and say, we're thinking of spending, I'm going to assume, a considerable amount of money on this, because they're well respected and well known in the sector. We're going to spend a lot of money on this report. What do you guys think the report should look at? And so maybe that's me not understanding sort of democratic processes, but for me, I would just think like it would be best practice if you're going to commission a bit of work, essentially, to take that to, like she says, the right place in the first place.
So, yeah, I mean, I certainly don't recall it ever been mentioned in a previous committee, although I have to say often I only kind of tune into bits which I've noticed. So it might have come up, who knows? But yeah, this is certainly the first time we're made aware of it. And just to kind of reiterate the political situation. So there was a new mayor came in sort of last May 2023, and I think that the Conservatives kind of panicked at the spending on temporary accommodation, because temporary accommodation costs were going through the roof. There's no doubt about it. I don't know what the actual spending was in real terms, but huge amounts of money were going on TA. And my guess is there was a knee-jerk reaction. Okay, how do we stop this? How do we get people out of TA? Someone had this bright idea of bringing in Andy Gale and Anna Whalen in to kind of, give some sort of basis for doing so. But it seems to, been kind of kept out that was all happening at the time. So yeah, and again, I might be wrong on this, but I think the fact that this was an extraordinary meeting, which might have been called at quite last minute notice, as far as we know, that might reflect the fact that they suddenly realised they needed to put this through a committee before they can have it come into place. So it might have been rushed for that reason. I don't know. Who knows? So this is Councillor Ben Foley. So he's a Green councillor. I don't know him that well, but again, he's a solid guy. He asked some good questions. There are 3 Green councillors in Bedford, so they don't have a lot of power kind of politically, but they also kind of I think they're all based in the town centre. There's 2 wards across the town centre which they're both in. So these and there've been previous kind of comments about a lot of temporary accommodation being shunted into these areas, and kind of you get a lot of antisocial behaviour if you put lots of people together with similar needs. So he's kind of raised those concerns before. I can't remember what he actually says here, but let's see what happens.
We're told about the need to discuss legal remedies and alternative options in cases of domestic abuse. And that left me with the question in my mind: what are these legal remedies and alternative options? Sorry, Councillor Foley, could I ask you just to tell me the page number again, please? So we're all on the same page. I'm sorry, because of my dyslexia, I can't view stuff in the same format that you do, so I don't have your page numbers.
I think when it comes to domestic abuse, one of the things that pains me is that sometimes a victim, women and children, or it could be the other way around, are the ones that are forced to leave a situation and lose their tenancy or lose their home, and the perpetrator is able to continue on in the property. One of the things that, if we had the opportunity of an earlier intervention and the right advice when it is safe to do so, it may be possible that the police can support with injunctions or ways of excluding a perpetrator from a home to keep the family safe. But as I said, it really depends on the individual circumstances of the case and what's safe and what's right for that particular family circumstance. But I do think sometimes people lose a tenancy unnecessarily because remedies haven't been offered earlier.
Thank you. That was the sort of thing I was.
Sorry, Sharon, you're going to...
I was just going to say survivors of domestic abuse don't lose their tenancy when they're experiencing domestic abuse. That's not their choice. They don't lose their tenancy. I know the point she's trying to make, but I think you've got to be mindful of words when you're talking about this sort of stuff. To be honest, it does matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem, the one of the problems she's got here is that by the way, I think, I think she's totally sincere in what she says. I think she cares about the issue. She's in a difficult position. She's in a public situation. You know, I've just gone in and asked a difficult question. She's probably, you know, I'd imagine quite nervous in terms of, you know, she's been recorded and have people commenting on her video later on, this sort of thing. So she's kind of got this. I think we need to be sort of generous with the wording she goes with, because she's not a lawyer and she's not, you know, she knows what she's talking about, but she's in a setting which is difficult. But we will run into some problems a little bit. You know, this kind of sets up this issue of domestic abuse and how these applications are taken a bit further down the line. Because on the surface, yeah, what she's saying is, yeah, you know what, there will be times when there are other remedies available and we need to make sure we explore them. The way the report deals with it, in my opinion, is really kind of is straying into some very problematic kind of guidance for housing officers. You know, the bottom line is if someone is experiencing domestic abuse or likely to, probably going to continue to experience domestic abuse in their own home, then they are already legally homeless. And so from a legal point of view, it's quite tricky to talk about it as preventative work. You know, she hasn't used that word yet, but we'll see it a bit later on. You know, prevention is something that happens when you're threatened with homelessness, technically. And I know, as I say, we're using kind of a mixture of technical words here and sort of everyday words. But I think as we see, she's gonna run into a bit of difficulty on this topic, I think, a bit later on, because we know councils will, you know, cases have had to make the point that people should not be expected to stay in a tenancy on the basis of a non-molestation order or something like that, because first of all, they're not entirely easy to get. In fact, they're quite difficult to get. And secondly, a lot of perpetrators don't care if there's a non-molestation order in place; they'll continue the abuse anyway. So yeah, I think what Anna's getting there is, I think she's absolutely right to. It's a difficult kind of setting to kind of actually have a sensible conversation about it. But yeah, I agree with what she just said. It's just it can run into problems a bit further down the line.
Can I? This was the point I want to just come back on, that I remembered from watching this, was that I thought that her explanation was slightly sinister in that it's a bit like when the government clamped down on migrants in small boats and then claim that they're doing it in order, they're letting these people drown in order to protect them from people smugglers. And when she says we don't want them to lose their tenancy, I mean, nobody wants them to lose their tenancy, but that doesn't mean that you start basically making noises about stay where you are and get an injunction. And you know that the other thing is, it's like an echo chamber. If somebody at the top starts getting a suggestion that this is okay, you'll get some frontline person telling somebody on a Friday afternoon, no, go away and get an injunction. We're not going to do anything. And my last point is, the reason I got into homelessness law in the first place was because I used to do domestic violence injunctions, and I was doing them day in, day out. And the problem was, it was a sort of production line, and the people would come back 6 months later and it would all happen again. And then I said, well, I realized after a bit, the best thing is to say, look, the best thing is just get out of here and get rehoused and put it all behind you. And so that's how I got into it in the first place. So I think it's a bit dodgy. And my last, sorry, I've got one last point, and I'll go back to quiet again. You said, Mike, that this lady who's the head of the operations in the homeless persons unit knows what she's doing. I think the sort of elephant in the room for me with this type of thing is, if these people know what they're doing, why do they need to get a consultant in to tell them why they've got more people going into TA? Can't they do the analysis themselves?
So I think that's a really good question. Again, I'm speculating here. I've been right about stuff before and I've been wrong about stuff before. My speculation is that the Anna and Lee, as I say, we'll see Lee in a minute, you know, both of whom I respect, don't always agree about stuff with them, but I think they care about having a good service. And I think they were effectively, you know, they were allowing, or, you know, they were kind of guiding that increase in TA. You know, they were kind of overseeing the service as it was taking people in. They were treating people properly. They weren't gatekeeping. They were so they were seeing that. And then the Conservative administration comes in and basically says, "Whoa, no, you need to, you know, this isn't okay." And so they're kind of, so, you know, I guess they're civil servants, aren't they? They've got to do what politicians tell them. So they're now told, you need to get people out of TA. And so my guess is the report comes out of that kind of place where essentially what the report's doing is it's undermining Anna's and Lee's competency to do it properly. There's a lot of undertones within that report about, you're not applying the vulnerability test properly, you're kind of taking a light touch, all of which I completely disagree with. I don't know, because going back to the report, so Anna Whalen and Andy Gale keep comparing Bedford with the rest of East Anglia, which is a legal aid desert. So, they get away with things that other areas will not get away with. They compare it with Medway, which I'm anecdotally told is one of the worst councils around. So the Andy Gale and Anna Whalen are comparing Bedford with terrible, or very poor performing councils and saying that that's the norm when it's not. So I think, and I think if I was in those roles and that report came out, I would feel undermined by the report. Kind of there's a lot of kind of, as I say, sort of, kind of undertones of, you guys haven't been doing your job properly. You've taken your eye off the ball. And so I think there's that dynamic going on
over
here as well.
generous, didn't it?
Yeah.
So over generous. I think it was in relation to local connection, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I, personally, if Anna was the housing officer, I would absolutely trust her to deal with people properly. But as you say, Will, in the hands of a statistic housing officer who doesn't care what's right and wrong, which there are some of, they would use that and kind of, they would be very sinister with it. So I think that's something that's going on here. I mean, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it. In the next committee, I'm going to mention the book, Street Level Bureaucracy, and I'm going to make the point that the most powerful people in Bedford Borough Council are not any of the people in the room here. They're the frontline workers, so they can say, oh, we're going to always follow the law on the microphones here. But the reality is, there's housing officers who don't really care. And in those private interview rooms, they'll do all sorts of dirty things to break the law. And finally, on this point, I'd say, and it will come back to it, with domestic abuse. Now, I've been talking to Shannon about hosting some kind of conversation with some key partners, because I've worked with domestic abuse survivors who essentially regret fleeing. Their experience of approaching another council is so bad that they rather would have stayed put. And so, given that there's that complexity to domestic abuse, I think there do need to be conversations around, is there a better way? And I'm not saying, non-molestation laws, I don't have any faith in them, but are there other ways or other things that could be explored properly and kind of responsibly, where something could be improved? But I think that goes above the law. The law is the law when it comes down to it. So we'll see that in a little bit. So yeah, let's see how this. As I say, I can't remember who asks what when here.
Was that a hand? A question? Yeah, Councillor Crofts.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the report or comments as well, Chair. I've got several concerns when reading this yesterday. 13 came up, but I think there are more. And I confer with the public speaker we had earlier that some of the sections of the report sound illegal. Now, my background is housing. I work in the charity sector giving housing advice. And the report reads like a corporate report to save money rather than a legal report where we've got trained housing staff trying to meet the law. Now, we can agree or disagree with the law, and fundamentally we disagree with a lot of the law that it is, but the law is the law at the end of the day. But there are sections in the report where it says we will not help families unless we see them face to face. That is illegal under section 188 of the Housing Act. Because if somebody is homeless and declares they're homeless and the local authority thinks that they have a priority need, their temporary accommodation rights start from that time they say, I am homeless, until the local authority makes a decision to say, you're not got priority need. So the law says we have to put those people in accommodation straight away. We cannot say to them, we can't see you face to face, go away. We had a gatekeeping problem in this council between 2015 and 2019. We had one of the highest rough sleeping populations in the country in this borough, having 75 rough sleepers, and we got that down to 2. We did that because we looked at the housing option service between that period and we made adjustments so we were meeting the law and we weren't gatekeeping.
So just a little comment on this here. I agree with everything you're saying here, except the time period we're talking about here. So he mentions that period 2015 to 2017 or 2019. I can't remember what he said now. The gatekeeping problem goes way back before that, just to make that point. So it's not, it wasn't suddenly there was a gatekeeping problem in 2015. That is essentially when Just Us was getting into its stride and highlighting these issues. And again, my guess is that in the previous administration, Councillor Crofts would have had a pretty key role in how this all kind of took place. So there was obviously the mayor, there was Michael Headley, who's sitting a couple of seats down from him, who used to be the head of finance. My guess is they were kind of, they were driving those improvements. I might be wrong about that, but that's kind of how it was. So in one sense, I was so happy that Councillor Crofts was in this meeting, because I think if he hadn't have been there, there wouldn't have been a lot of conversation going on here. Shannon?
So I cried, which again sounds so dramatic, but having been sat in that interview room with a housing officer who is basically telling you you're wrong about your own life and not believing you and everything else, and then learning about housing law and advocating for other people, and understanding a little bit about housing law, not to the extent of yourself and Will, but reading the report and just feeling gaslit. Up until this moment, I felt truly sort of like crazy. I thought, am I making this up? Like, am I reading too much into the document? Am I overthinking this? Is this because I've lived experience of being treated badly by Bedford Borough Council, or like what's real here? Like, I genuinely felt like that, and it sounds dramatic, and it really isn't meant to be. But like, when Councillor Dean Crofts is saying these things, it just felt so validating, and just like, thank you're here, because if he hadn't have been there, I don't know, and I know Ben Foley sort of asked a couple of questions, but I don't know who else would have spoken up to this level of understanding, and that scares me. So just thank you, Councillor Dean Crofts, because
I'd also say, just going back to Andy Gale and Anna Whalen, the way the report is written is very clever. Again, they are, they, as I already said, that they're well respected in the sector. They are, they kind of help local authorities out doing these sorts of things. But it's a lot of stuff, it's that kind of gaslighting type stuff. A lot of it stinks, but you can't quite point your finger on it. It's not, it's not quite smoking gun stuff. There are a few times when, as Councillor Crofts mentioned there, telling families that they can't be helped unless they are there in person. That's obviously unlawful. But there's a lot more stuff which is just grimy stuff which you can't quite sort of expose. So I absolutely agree with Shannon. It was absolutely crucial that he was there, and he was saying this stuff. He's got more to say, actually, as we'll find out in a minute.
And this report suggests that we go back to gatekeeping by giving more responsibility to customer services rather than housing options officers. It suggests reducing our out-of-hours operation. It suggests reducing help we give to domestic abuse, people suffering from domestic abuse, because we're putting too many of them in temporary accommodation. This is how I'm reading the report. So I hope the report doesn't mean that, but this is how it reads when it says we put too many people in temporary accommodation that are suffering from domestic abuse. Our biggest reason for temporary accommodation is Section 21 notices. That is the private rented sector. And even when the local housing allowances increase in April, there's still going to be £150 a week gap between the private rents available in this area and the amount of money somebody can get when they're claiming the LHA, which means that £150 gap, if we're putting them back into settled accommodation, has to be met by this council. Now, a lot of the problems in housing are not the fault of this council, but we have to deal with the problems that we get from national, which is a lack of supply of housing, too high rents, and we're now going to incentivise private landlords so they can get £3,500 to serve Section 21 notices, so they can make their property free for us to put somebody else in it, and the private landlord gets £3,500. That's a great incentive to issue a Section 21.
So what he's talking about there is a recommendation in the report that when a landlord's looking to evict, that they'll get paid £3,500 or whatever it was. I think that's potentially an amalgamation of two different sums. So that's just to give it context. That's what he's talking about there, which clearly he's not a fan of.
Which we just
Sorry, Shannon, you're gonna.
I was just gonna say, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this feels like the first time a councillor has mentioned the word gatekeeping in a housing committee meeting that hasn't been in response to something we've asked. So that's really sort of like refreshing as well, that he's openly talking about gatekeeping and it hasn't sort of just been a response from something we've asked.
Yeah, and on that note as well, so bearing in mind between 2015 and 2019 or whatever it was, they never acknowledged there was a gatekeeping problem. You know, that's not that. So we were kind of operating a bit like, you know, what you're saying, Shannon. You kind of reading the law and you kind of thinking, am I going crazy? Because this seems to be that they're breaking the law at the time. So it's, yeah, it's nice to kind of hear someone acknowledge that out loud on record.
They are my concerns. And can I ask Anna about the staff you've got coming on board and how many are trainees? Because all of the issues, which are only part of what we're concerned about, it's not in whole what we're concerned about, all of your trainees that are coming on board with no experience of housing law are going to be facing these problems. So how many trainees do you have?
And again, just to explain a bit of context here, so last year at some point, Bedford Borough Council secured funding for another 22 or 24 housing officers, and the recruitment process means that they're now kind of coming online now. So that's what that kind of references to.
So there's going to be about 12 trainees coming on board, but the intention is to keep an overlap with the fully trained agency staff that we currently have additionally until we're satisfied they're fully trained. And we've got tight supervision arrangements in place on the team before they go live to support them with the casework. And I agree with you, these are complex, difficult legal decisions. So the training programme is intensive. It's intended to be intensive. I don't know if I can come back and comment on any of the points raised. Am I allowed? Can I come back and comment on some of what you said? I am committed to offering a face-to-face initial assessment, but I will never turn a family away if they're unable to attend and we assess that they are in need of temporary accommodation. And I'm happy to say that publicly. It's a commitment of mine that we will do what's right for the customer by the law. I'd like to know where in the report it implies or suggests that we would do otherwise, because that...
So just to make the point, you're right, the microphones weren't on here, so I can't do anything about the sound quality. This is as good as I can get it.
Okay, so we can't gather evidence on the day. That person should not receive any help.
No, we would, if we have reason to believe they may be homeless, eligible and in priority need, then we will offer them temporary accommodation, because that is the law. So
and that's what I think the public speaker was referring to earlier, about parts of the report sound legal in the way that it's been written.
That's certainly not the intent.
It's just a consultancy report at the end of the day.
That's
It's not recommendations we have to take on board.
yeah.
Sorry, you didn't hear my comment.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
We were engaged.
Yeah, sorry, so parts of the report just read that if somebody is not seen face to face and we can't gather evidence that they've got priority need on that day, then we should not be putting those people in temporary accommodation. Now, that is illegal under section 188, but it doesn't say that in the report. It also doesn't say in the report why private landlords charge us over £200 a week for temporary accommodation, and what's the marketplace for that, and what is the reasons of that, and why does it cost us so much to put people in temporary accommodation? We know why it costs so much in hotels, but we're putting them in hotels because there is no private rented places available. So that's where the cost is coming from, because of lack of supply.
I think Mr. Fanco would like to chip in at this stage, if that's okay.
Thank you.
So this is Lee Fanco. So he was Anna's predecessor. I'm not quite sure what his role is now, but he was in post in housing since about 2017. Again, when this period of improvements was taking place. So again, we don't always agree about stuff, but he's well within the bandwidth of decency.
Chair. So, Councillor Croft, just want to reassure you from the point of view of the monitoring officer that there should be nothing implied in the report that is suggesting that the council will be acting unlawfully in terms of its approach to homelessness. I appreciate the point you're making, and what the report is saying is that we will aim to see people face to face to enable us to do a proper and robust assessment. But as Anna has just said, if somebody contacts us and gives us reason to believe that they are homeless and eligible and in priority need, then we will do what the law requires.
And just to be really pernickety, because this is something that comes all the time, that's not the threshold. The threshold is reason to believe that they might be homeless, might be eligible, might be priority, not that they are, which is, might seem like a real small detail, but it's different. And I know he knows that. He's just, I think he's, again, in the setting, he just got it a bit wrong. And just to go back a second, Dean Croft's assessment of what is said in the report is correct. That's what the report does say. It does say, there needs to be this assessment before TA happens. Then, there needs to be face-to-face before TA is given. So although they might be reading it in a different way, the report at face value says it's basically telling the council to do things which aren't lawful.
I think this is where I struggle. Because look, like you say, Lee and Anna, they're in such an incredibly difficult job. They worked quite closely with us, I feel, and do feel like they care. At the same time, and maybe it's because I feel like they care that I'm holding them to slightly higher standards than I would a different council. But how can you sit there and say that's not our intent? Our intent, I will publicly say I'll follow the law. That shouldn't be something you have to sort of say publicly. You should just be doing that. And then to say it doesn't read like that, or it does, like you've just said, it's in black and white, and there were glaringly obvious illegal bits if we just ignore all the coded stuff. So I'm so disappointed, and that's not to throw any shade. I get it's difficult, but they're both intelligent people, and it just leads me to sort of then distrust. And I'm like, well, is what you're saying in this meeting true, or is the document that you've decided to pay for true? Where do you actually sort of stand? And that's what often where I sort of sit with the sort of anger and stuff, because I'm like, and I get that they have to have one relationship with sort of their bosses and the finance, and do you know what I mean? They can't sort of openly be we're dealing with gatekeeping, because then they'd be admitting the problem. I get that, but at the same time, there should be a respect for Bedford Borough citizens who live in our council area, who are approaching housing. There should be just a general level of respect there to be honest about what they are and aren't meaning to do. And it doesn't match with what the report says. And to say that it does, I found really disrespectful, actually.
Can I just come in with a point? Did you know, just maybe I'm being pernickety or paranoid, but did you notice when Anna was speaking, she said that if she ever had a family who were presenting as homeless and they had reason to believe, etc., she would give them temporary. That doesn't bode very well for people with no children, which the implication of what she's saying is you're imagining these waifs and strays and her sort of protecting them. But if you've got a sort of single person with mental health problems turning up, they may be told, oh, well, she did say family, didn't she? And I know that's probably cynical, but you just think if she makes a sound, it gets echoed out down the echo chamber to the front line, and it gets distorted. But the other thing I can't quite understand, as you're saying, they seem like nice people, and I take your word for it. But what are they doing getting a report if they've got a report in because somebody said we're putting too many people in temporary accommodation, and they get somebody in, it's likely they're probably going to come up with ways of gatekeeping, because that's about the only way you can stop putting people into temporary accommodation unless you address underlying things. I mean, it's the easiest way, isn't it, to stop people putting into temporary accommodation? Just refuse to put them in there and find excuses.
You're 100% right, and Mike, I really, really appreciate they're going to be nervous. This is a public setting, they're getting questions fired at them, and perhaps I'm not being as compassionate as I should be here. I acknowledge that, but this is part of their job. They get paid a lot of money to be able to handle these situations, and if you're worried about the questions that are going to be coming your way, you've probably not done something right. If you're doing everything right and everything's dandy, you're going to be full with any questions because you can back it up. So, and again, it's not about Lee and Anna. It's about the like we were saying, the single homeless people who have mental health problems. It's about the families. It's about the domestic abuse survivors. It's about anyone who is at risk of homelessness not being treated lawfully. And so whilst I really do sympathise, and like, look, I didn't go and ask a question in person because it's nerve-wracking. I don't get paid what they get paid, and it's not my responsibility to be making sure that a local authority is following the law. I do appreciate that I'm perhaps not being quite as compassionate as I should be.
I think what is said in this meeting absolutely matters. As Will says, it kind of ripples out. I think she was mentioning families there because that was essentially the way it was coming out. That's why it says in the report they talk about families. But I mean, I guess I think there's another layer of stuff going on here. Speculating, I don't think that either Anna or Lee probably wanted that report to happen, but it did, and they're now in a situation where they're having to give public questions and stuff like that. So I think there's that dynamic going on as well, which means that what this definitely isn't is an honest conversation. That's definitely not what's happening here. It's not an open and honest conversation about what's going on. This is not, there's lots of problems with this, and many of the people in this discussion will know full well what these coded advice kind of guidance bits are from that report. So
and many people who aren't speaking up, I think, is potentially the unfair bit of this, because Lee and Anna are definitely getting a bit of my sort of, but actually there's people, powerful people in that room that are keeping stum, and they're worse.
Yeah. As I say, there are certainly some people I don't respect in that room at the minute. So I think, but I think that's the nature of politics. You kind of going back to a kind of overall aim here of kind of trying to give a commentary into local democracy. You can't have those honest conversations. They don't exist really in the kind of political sphere. But that doesn't mean to say you're not having an impact. So as you kind of, we already said, by asking the question, they were obviously interested in it, bothered by it, which is why there's a bit of kind of drama before the meeting started. That's got their attention. That can lead to good things. I remember a number of changes we've got over the years where their kind of party line was, there's no problem, we're not, we don't need to change anything. But behind the scenes, they were changing things. So that's what's, I think, there's a lot of things going on here. I don't envy them, that's for sure. But I agree with you, Shannon, that what they're doing is incredibly important. It's life or death for some people. They probably could be a little bit more transparent about what's going on here.